welcome to the Saints Week in Review. And what a week it's been. Scotland has voted no to independence and the RNA have voted yes to women. We start off with the Scottish independence vote. I'm joined this week by Jonathan Bucks, the editor of The Saint, and Paul McDaid, a spokesperson for the Yes campaign in St Andrews. Paul, to start off with, what does it mean that St Andrews, or Scotland as a whole, has voted against independence? What does it mean for St Andrews?
What does it mean for St Andrews? Well, in the short term, I don't think we'll really feel any of the effects of a no vote. It seems business as usual, back to what we know. No real change as of yet. Long term, we can't really see. There's so much uncertainty about what might happen in the future. We now have no guarantees on the Scottish budget in the future and how that could affect tuition fees. There's also the prospect of the EU referendum in 2017. So although people were worried about uncertainty with a yes vote, there's now a lot of uncertainty about what the future holds in the long term for the UK and how that could affect St Andrews.
Do you think the offer of more devolved powers from David Cameron and people might be able to help St Andrews in the future to rise even higher than it is as a university?
Well, the problem with the promise of more devolved powers is we've got no exact promise of what these powers are. We've got three parties vaguely committed to the idea of more powers, but whether they genuinely improve and strengthen the Scottish Parliament, we don't really know. The famous sort of saying is, power devolved is power retained. As part of Gordon Brown's timetable for devolution, we were told that on Friday the 19th of September a motion would be put to the House of Commons that all three parties would support that. That's already not happened, so that's one promise broken already. We know Nick Legg's got a history of breaking promises, so we really can't tell what this devolution is.
Mm-hmm. Jonathan, the Saint this week came out quite strongly in favour against independence. Do you want to explain why that happened? Because we've been impartial until this week.
That's right. Until Thursday, we hadn't taken a stance, but we decided that given we put ourselves forward as the voice of St Andrews students, we had to take a stance based on the future of this institution and the reputation of St Andrews, and also what's best for its students. Looking at the facts and figures, we came to the conclusion that independence would have been drastic for the university, principally in terms of finance. We had three main arguments. Firstly, being that if Scotland were to become an independent country, that would place our UK students into a country that was just part of another EU member state. That would close a loophole, which means that, which at the moment means that our UK students have to pay £9,000. That would be hugely damaging in terms of revenue, and who knows what effect that would have had. The other point that we made was about research grants. Now, at the moment, Scotland is part of a UK-wide research fund group, but we saw that if Scotland became independent, then St Andrews and other Scottish universities would be hugely and drastically affected by that. And as a junior partner, we couldn't see how they would continue to perform the best research that they're capable of at the moment. Our final point was that all of these facts would lead to a brain drain. You would see top academics, top students no longer wanting to come to St Andrews, no longer wanting to come north of the border, staying south, and again that would be terribly damaging. And I see this morning that in the Sunday Times, St Andrews has again been the top university in Scotland, and this is something we should be immensely proud of. And the Saint came to the conclusion that independence would severely hamstring our ability to be in that position.
Mm-hmm. Paul, you've lost the vote, but do you think that this has had a positive effect on national politics in St Andrews and the discussion of it? Because we've always had a really strong student politics, but not so much with the national side of things, at least recently. And do you think it's helped with that?
I feel in some ways kind of let down by the way people engaged with the referendum in St Andrews. I'm not going to lie. I feel at times people didn't quite grasp what the debate was about. Sort of intelligent people coming up to me and saying things like, "You can't vote yes. That'll mean I need a visa to study here." This was, English students, and if they'd looked into any of the material available to them, they would have realised that would never have been the case.
So do you think it's actually harmed the?
I don't think it's harmed. I think there's been, I'm pretty sure that the political societies that already existed, sort of your Labour Party society or your Conservatives, I'm in no doubt were active throughout the past couple of weeks and throughout the last year of the referendum campaign. And we've had a small society working really hard, engaging with local people about national politics. But I think in general, St Andrews isn't a particularly political institution, and I think it has been disappointing we were out campaigning one week and a student comes up and says, "Hasn't the referendum already been?" And it's that lack of awareness that has been quite disappointing. But I think in Scotland in general, there's been a growing awareness of politics. The fantastic turnout that we had is something to be really, really proud of. And then that momentum being carried forward is something that's really important. A lot of the sort of groups that have sprung up because of the independence debate, not exactly political, sort of like groups of artists that realised that politics was important to them for the first time, have made statements in the last couple of days that they'll continue to make sure that there is real change in Scottish society, and we as a society, the St Andrews Students for Independence, will continue in some shape or form to ensure that the momentum that we've created continues. So I think it should have positive effects in the future. I would have thought though that a yes vote would have been better to carry that momentum on, but obviously not the case.
And Jonathan, moving on, this week the accommodation crisis has taken a bit of a darker turn. There's been accommodation fraud and the police are looking into this. Do you want to explain what's happened?
Yeah, that's right. We had 6 or 7 students, the police weren't entirely clear there, but at least 6 students who have been targeted by a fraudster he went by the name of Zhang Ping, I think, and he was ostensibly putting up a property that was actually made up of 5 separate flats. Now, fortunately, the majority of the students didn't fall for the ruse, but there were 2 who were left severely out of pocket. I think in total it was something like £2,200 that was lost. Now, people will say that these kind of things happen, but the spokesperson from Police Scotland said that these students were in panic mode. And I think that what you're seeing here is the effects of a severe paucity of accommodation for students. They're much more likely to fall for these tricks if they are desperate and in panic mode, as the spokesperson said.
And what's the advice for students?
The advice is to be vigilant, as always. Check out the credentials, and the Students' Association of the university are there to help. So consult them, and if it seems too good to be true, which in this case it sounds like it was, then that's probably the case.
And do you think that this kind of underlines the fact that we need to solve this accommodation crisis?
Absolutely. I think these students, many of them said that the deal sounded brilliant, and they couldn't quite believe it. Some of them, like they said, thought it was too good to be true, and yet 2 of them went for it because they were so desperate about the lack of accommodation. It's something we really need to tackle. Otherwise, these fraudsters will realise that there are students here who are sitting duck to a target because they are so desperate. And I think it's a salient point that the spokesperson from Police Scotland said that this person could be on the moon. They could be anywhere, but they're clearly aware that there is a problem here. There is a shortage of housing, and they've capitalised on that.
There was also a vote this week on the Royal and Ancient admitting women, and of course 85% of their members voted yes. I'm now joined by Ali West from the Feminist Society. Ali, over the summer you wrote a letter to the Royal and Ancient. Why did you do that?
Thank you for that question. It's actually one I've gotten a lot over the past couple of weeks. on one hand, it can seem like an issue that is a little bit sort of less relevant. It is a members-only club, it's all male, but on the other hand, if you look at the news coverage that this issue has gotten in the past couple of weeks, and in particular the stance that Louise Richardson has taken, it's clear that it's an organization that is very much identified strongly with St. Andrews and with the game of golf, and we thought that it was appropriate for us to take a stance.
So obviously they've now voted yes, but the Augusta National voted in 2012 to admit 2 women. Those are still the only 2 women in that club. The Royal and Ancient have said they're going to speed up the application of 15 women. Do you think that this is just really a way of a group of misogynists getting people to go away, or is it actually going to change anything?
I think at this stage it's a little bit too early to tell. I think that will become more obvious over the course of the next couple of months and years. And I also am very encouraged by the statistic of 85% of the members voting to include women. I think that's a really good thing and a good sign.
Does it not worry you that that figure wasn't 100% though?
It does a little bit. At the same time, obviously not being a member of the club and not being present for the vote, I can't comment on that.
In a more general sense though, sport is often accused of being sexist. What can people do? Obviously admitting people to the same clubs as the men is a start, but what else can be done to get rid of sexism in sport?
I think that we need to address sexism as a society-wide problem. It is something that crops up again and again in nearly every field, from media to politics to sport, and I think that we need to look at a fundamental cultural shift in the way that we look at women, especially women in the public eye, and especially women who are working in traditionally male-dominated fields. I think that until we work very, very consciously to address our own biases, we won't see change in any field, including sport.
In other news this week, Jonathan, the G1 group has taken over the house restaurants. Do you want to explain what's happened?
Yeah, absolutely. If people don't know, then G1 is a company that owns a large number of restaurants, bars and pubs around Scotland. In St Andrews until last week, it owned Forgan's, Mitchell's and the Vic, and it now owns the Glass House, the Doll's House and the Grill House. That means it has quite a large influence. It owns 6 of, I think, about 27 fine dining and general restaurants in St Andrews, so that's a large number. And if you add to that the other restaurants and bars it owns in Scotland in general, then it certainly has a tight grip over the market.
And all of these are quite popular in St Andrews. Should we be worried that G1 is going to have a monopoly on restaurants?
G1 has said that in terms of the house restaurants, that nothing will change in terms of staff, and that the staff who are there at the moment won't be affected. They'll continue with their jobs. So on the face of it, it seems like nothing is going to change. I think we should always be wary of monopolisations of markets and sort of the creeping advances of one company, especially in such a small town as St Andrews. I think it's probably too early to tell if it will affect the restaurant business and the staff who work at these restaurants.
Well, Ali and Jonathan, thank you very much, and thank you to Paul earlier in the show. Next week, we'll be bringing you whatever that week brings. We've already had the death of Hamish McHamish, the most famous St Andrews resident, the vote on Scottish independence, and the vote on the RNA, all national news stories, and the international in some cases. Thank you very much for joining me.